You're listening to the Bold Apologia podcast. Here you can expect to find real conversation and dialogue centralized around the purpose for sharing the hope of Jesus Christ in light of theology, apologetics, and culture. We hope and believe this episode will add confidence to your faith by equipping you with boldness to share the good news of the gospel. And now, your host, Adam Parker.
Hey there, Bold Apologia podcast listeners. I'm your host, Adam Parker. Thank you for tuning in to this podcast. I'm actually really excited to have an opportunity to talk once again with Andrew Rappaport. Sometimes when I talk about him with other people, I kind of call him the godfather of the Christian podcast community. I really enjoy his company, being able to talk to him, things like that. And one thing that is always interesting when it comes to Andrew is the opportunity to talk to him about issues related to Israel, geopolitics, politics in general, things like that. And this is going to be a much more political podcast that I'm about to get into here, because really what I'd like to do is talk about Israel. I'd like to get into the topic of dispensationalism a little bit. I want to talk about the 12-day war, which hopefully, Lord willing, stays just a 12-day war and is concluded. We'll see how that goes. You know how some of these things can be just regarding Israel and Iran. So be praying for them. Be praying that it stays just a 12-day war. And one of the things that you will have often heard when you listen to my intro to my videos or my podcasts, it says that this is all done in light of theology, apologetics, and culture. And this is a cultural issue. And so, yeah, of course, we'll talk a little bit about political things, and that's okay. And Christians should not be silent on these issues. It's so important that we talk about these things. And so with that said, I'm going to go ahead and add Andrew to the stage. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us. I'm excited about this conversation that really we're going to be having here. So thank you.
Well, thanks for having me. Glad to be back on the Bold Apologia podcast.
Yeah, thank you so much. Like I said, I wanted to talk about Israel, dispensationalism, and the 12-day war. I actually recently put up a post. It was June 19th, around the time the 12-day war really kicked off. And I got a lot of pushback, and they're from Christians. And I'm not saying that Christians can't be opposed to Israel or or anything like that, particularly the nation state or the political entity that it is. I'm not saying Christians can't criticize Israel. I'm not in that camp. Growing up as a kid, actually, being that I grew up in Pentecostal circles, charismatic circles, I know what it's when these people who are often criticizing Israel, because there are people who do, when they are criticizing Israel, they bring up the most extreme examples, and I have seen and lived in the most extreme examples where Israel can do no wrong, where you don't even have to give your life to Christ. If you're a Jew, you can just be saved by following the law, which it's impossible for someone who is Jewish to follow the law, not just because it's impossible, but because there's no sacrificial system in the first place. I just point that out. But there's issues related to that, and I don't know if it's just a cultural swing in the other direction because of the craziness that has been seen on some of these, media outlets like TBN. They're really supportive of Israel and all of that. But anyway, we get to the point where we're at now, and I'm just noticing a huge change. And I'm noticing a huge change of where it's like it's gotten to the point where there's a massive amount of Christian tolerance, or even promotion of just anti-Semitic rhetoric in general, is what I'm trying to say. And so with that said, would you just take some time, introduce yourself. One thing that I know I'm going to hear, Andrew, is there will be people who will respond and say, well, nothing Andrew says is true because he's Jewish. That's going to come up. It is. It's actually quite sickening. And these people are Christians who would be saying this. It's crazy. It's crazy. Which is also, those of you who are already prepared to say that, I just need you to know that is a logical fallacy. It's called the genetic fallacy. You cannot discredit someone's argument because of their ethnicity or their origin. That's not how any of this works. But with that said, Andrew, can you introduce yourself, talk about some of the podcasts you do, some of the work you do, and then we'll jump right into this discussion.
Sure. As you mentioned, yes, I am from a Jewish background. Many people will say that's why I'm dispensational. No, it's not. We could get into that more. I am the president and executive director of both Striving for Eternity and the Christian Podcast Community. And so Striving for Eternity is really a discipleship ministry. We try to do discipleship through many means. Through Christian Podcast Community, we try to disciple podcasters, help them improve, and give them a way of working together, getting their content out. And as far as churches, we go into churches. Usually churches, we try to go to the churches where none of the big ministries will go to, because there's not enough money in it, because they're going to lose money, and they're more about doing a business. So we're not. We're actually interested in doing ministry. It's a crazy idea. But we go to churches that are smaller. I've preached to the smallest size. I've flown around the country to go to 5 people, 6 people, and I'm perfectly fine with that. As a ministry, we want to help those smaller churches. So we come in and give them that big conference feel as far as bringing in weekend seminars, things like that. We have an online academy that people can take for free. That's how we make our money. Oh, wait. That doesn't quite make money. All right. So, but yeah, we have some courses out there they could take for free. And so that's a little bit about the ministry. To the points that you were saying, there's a lot of people who have been responding ever since really October 7th. I have seen a ton of people, more so with the 12-day war, which I kind of think Trump titled it the 12-day war for 2 reasons. There was the six-day war that Israel had, which just was to show how effective they were in their warfare, in their intelligence, and the same here.
And that was with Egypt and a number of other nations, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it really was kind of creative. I mean, they had people that had basically set up areas where underground where they would be able to come in quickly to Israel. And what Israel did was had a guy who worked his way up into the senior level and convinced them to put a specific tree. I forget what type of tree, but to put a tree at each of the spots so it would look more natural. And once they agreed to do that, Israel knew exactly where to bomb. Took out all of their bunkers.
Wow.
And so, I mean, now they're just shooting missiles through people's bedroom windows.
Yeah.
I mean, the accuracy, and they get accused of, they're killing families, and they're taking out hospitals. And what we saw was the hospital in Gaza was taken out by people in Gaza that didn't have great weaponry, and that one went awry. Now, Iran hit a hospital in Israel. I don't remember seeing that in the news, huh? Not in the American news. What do you know? But after October 7th, and more so with the start of the 12-day war, we have seen a lot of people in mostly Reformed Camp Covenant theology camp that have been pushing back on Israel. And I think it's a theological argument that they're trying to argue for, rather than I'm trying to think what would be a good word for it, because there's some that actually just reject the nation of Israel altogether. And that's how far it has come. Yeah. And their view that Israel is the church has affected it so much that they're just almost rewriting history.
Yeah. Actually, I have heard some of the craziest art, like, so, and I know what you're saying too. The coming from the covenantal perspective, and of course they're going to be very opposed to the idea of a modern Israel or Israel being reborn, because God has rejected Israel in covenant theology. But even to the point where they're rewriting the history of Zionism.
You know, a guy who I've had on my Rappaport podcast is, you know, Dale Partridge, and I had him on my podcast talk about head coverings, but he's got a new book out called The Israel Delusion: Challenging Christian Zionism and Reclaiming the Church as the True Israel. And when he posted this online, he said, the Jews are not the covenant people of God. If we confuse covenant identity with ethnic identity, we will misread the entire arc of redemptive history. Now, here's the thing. That doesn't change the entire arc of redemptive history. It just affects their view that they are Israel. Because the covenant made with Abraham was not to his believing children. It was to his children. Right? And it was from Abraham to Isaac to Jacob, Jacob being called Israel. What is Israel? It was initially that lineage that became a nation. And there's some people that deny that Israel is a nation today. That's how far they're going. They want to just deny, Israel doesn't exist. I had one person online who made the argument that there's no good reason, there's no reason we should be defending Israel. And I said, how about justice? God is just. They were unfairly attacked, and it wasn't a military attack because they went after civilians. And folks, especially on the left, don't want to make this point. Where did they attack? They attacked in Tel Aviv, one of the most liberal cities in Israel, at a rave where there would be a whole bunch of drugs and homosexuality. And the people that did the attacking said they were doing it for those reasons. So they went after civilians. So this was not just war. They went after it for all the liberals who are defending Gaza. I think all these Americans who are here, the leftists who are supporting Gaza, if they really want to make a difference, go there. See how long you last, because they would kill them quicker than those in Israel over their views. Because it's, and so you have people that have gone so far in their arguments, and it's unnecessary. The fact that there is a nation of Israel today does not deny covenant theology.
No.
Or at least it shouldn't, but in the minds of some, they cannot handle that God would bring Israel back into focus. And maybe I'll upset folks. Could it be that Donald Trump, all the Christians, at least the dispensational Christians now, covenant theologians don't like him. Could it be that he's going to bring about the Antichrist? I mean, could he be the one that brings peace to Israel? Just throw that out there. But, it's interesting that, I have been seeing so many attacks on dispensationalists online for bringing up Israel and the view of dispensationalism and premillennialism. All these dispensationalists. I do not see dispensationalists talking about Israel. I see covenant theologians attacking dispensationalists for talking about Israel. And I'm going, where are all these posts that you're all referring to? Because I'm not seeing it. Now, granted, maybe I'm not on enough, but I have a lot more dispensational friends than non-dispensational friends, and I don't see them posting it. I just see all the non-dispensationalist folks attacking us, saying we are. And I'm going,
yeah, well, to go to that too, I know that you said that it was more of a theological issue, but honestly, I think that's true, but honestly, I think there's a little more to it, and I think it's a little more personal than what a lot of these covenantal brothers would want us to believe, especially when you get further and further into the more extreme way of talking that some of these guys have. And there's obviously also a covenantal libertarian mix to it. I'd even throw that out there too. They take it personal. They take it personal that Israel exists, that our country supports them, and that we give them aid, that our military works closely together with their military. And if you go far enough, there is this bizarre theory or conspiracy theory that Israel is part of this secret cabal to control the world. And it's a Jewish cabal used to control the world and take over the world and stay in power, basically, which is interesting because I think Adolf Hitler had some pretty similar sentiments. But let's follow that for a minute. Some of these guys, not all of them, but some of them even deny the Holocaust. They'll deny the Holocaust. They will deny that Hitler was in the wrong. They'll deny that. I have talked with some of these individuals who will say that Hitler even had a point. So there's this growing rhetoric of anti-Semitism coming from that particular persuasion. I don't think it's sourced out of it. I'm not sure where the source comes from. Maybe you have some ideas regarding that. But definitely this weird anti-Semitic flavor of theology. I don't even know if that's the right way to put it.
It's Marxism working its way in. It's Marxist thinking. And the very people who hear me say that are going, there's no way I'm Marxist. You are. You're practicing Marxism. You're dividing a group of people. And their argument, the reason is because, well, the Jews they have a lot of money. They control things. Do you know why Jewish people raise their kids to be doctors, lawyers, people of influence, to positions where you make money? Because their theory is that if they make the money, and I totally disagree with this, but this is why so many Jewish people support Democrats. The thinking is if they support the party that would be willing to be the ones that were willing to kill them, they won't kill them because they need the money. That doesn't quite work, right? But the idea is that really at the heart of it, many Jewish families, just like Asian families, are very family oriented. And so when you have a majority of people that aren't family oriented, it affects how, those children are going to be, how well balanced they're going to be, how they're going to be producing for their family as they grow, things like that. So a lot of it is the family, and they don't see the core differences. It's also the fact that the Jewish people are being identified separate from every other group. Right. So it's just everyone else in America and then the Jewish people. And it's a thing where I find interesting because they don't call this out with the Muslims who actually are looking to do exactly that. Go to Dearborn, Michigan. They've taken over a town. They have their call to worship playing. Right. In Europe, the UK, the governor, the mayor of London, the biggest city in the UK, I just read a report that he outlawed the bells in churches being chimed because Muslims find it offensive while they're playing their call to worship first thing in the morning, waking people up. And it's like, wait, that country actually has a state religion, Anglicanism, which is the church. So the state church can't play their bells to not offend Muslims, but Muslims can play their call to worship, and somehow no one's supposed to be offended.
It's bizarre. It is so bizarre. It is beyond me how that can happen. It's like you're so open-minded that you have surgically removed your brain from your head and left it out of there.
It happens because, this is why I say it's Marxism. They want something that someone else has. In the case of money, a lot of people don't like Jewish people because, they have money. So it must be, I want, and that's what a lot of the Marxism is. Yeah. Everything's unfair because someone else has something I don't have and I should have it. I shouldn't have to work for it. They should just give it. I think theologically, as you see in Dale's title of his book, they want to be that covenant special people that God had in the Old Testament. And if God does something in the future with Israel, I think for a lot of them, they think, well, then that means I wouldn't be God's special people. No, God has been really clear. He was dealing with Israel. Israel right now is under God's judgment because he's working through Gentiles. And so, yeah, he's still working in Israel in a judgment way because of their idolatry and their sin and their rejection of the Messiah. And he is still working with them. But the fact that he's got a future plan for them, for some, it's like, oh, well, that means that covenant theology isn't. Well, I would disagree with covenant theology in the way they come about the interpretations. And this is why. Because what ends up happening is you're interpreting scripture through a covenant lens rather than interpreting the different genres of literature the way the rules are laid out for them. And that's why I'd be a dispensationalist, because I follow the rules of language. What they will say is, well, the Bible's a spiritual book, so it has to be interpreted in a spiritual way. My challenge with that is always, well, how do you get to decide what is the spiritual way and what is not? Because when you go to the Mormons, you go to the Jehovah, you go to any group, they do the same thing. How can you say they're wrong? How do you say Roman Catholicism is wrong with their style of interpretation, which is where the reformers got it from? That's why I don't think it's right to call people that are in our camps covenant theologians, because covenant theology came out of Roman Catholicism. What they hold is reformed theology, because it reformed it got rid of the magisterium and the tradition and looked just at the scriptures, but they kept that same hermeneutic, where dispensationalism was to step back and say, why don't we just be consistent with following the rules of language? God gave us language for a reason. There's rules for language, and we follow that. Now, does it fit perfectly? No, it doesn't, because there's times where God, in his infinite wisdom, he has dual meanings for things. He could say, out of Israel, I call my son, referring in the Old Testament to the nation of Israel, but in the New Testament referring to Christ. Yeah. Now, the difference there is I can say, okay, you know when I am going to see that spiritualization or the dual meaning? When I see it in the Bible.
Right. And I wanted to speak to that point on dispensationalism, just to kind of clear things up a little bit, because the automatic belief is if you support Israel, you are a dispensationalist. And I'm not sure where you fall in this, Andrew. I don't know if you're pre-trib, mid-trib, post-trib. I know that
you forgot one.
Oh, what did I forget? Pre-wrath?
Pro-trib. If there's a tribulation, all for it. So kind of like on pro-millennial, if there's a millennium, all for it.
Pan-trib.
No, see, I don't want to be. I don't like the pan. Pan means it's all going to work out in the end. No, like be for it.
For some people,
for it.
It's going to work out for some people. for others, they're not going to be. It's
going to work out for God's glory one way or the other. So I'm all for that.
Yeah. So you are for pan-trib then?
No, because that pans out. I'm pro.
Okay.
I'd be premillennial, pre-tribulational for folks who know those terms.
Okay, so that's where you'd fall, as the pre-trib sort of camp.
It's not an area that out of all of the theological areas I teach on, I really don't focus a lot on end times. I think that I personally believe that, yes, there's a lot of scripture that points to the second coming of Christ, to all of these end times things. And I think that there is so much confusion, debate, discussion, because it's not as clear as everyone wants to pretend it is. And that's why the first coming was missed by the Jewish people, because they were looking for what they saw in the second coming.
Yeah.
And we have the advantage of hindsight there. So we can go, look, that clearly was fulfilled. Yeah, because it happened 2,000 years ago, and we have it recorded in God's word. But they missed it. And I think that when people are super, super dogmatic, I think it could be troublesome.
Yeah. So often when people are talking about dispensationalism, they specifically mean pre-trib, which is why I wanted to clarify that with you.
Not always. It's more they think premillennial.
Right.
And,
well, yes.
And let me just say one thing real quick. Dispensationalism is not an end times theology. Okay. It's a hermeneutical one, how you interpret the Bible.
Right.
And when you're consistent with that hermeneutic, you come to a premillennial view. So it's a byproduct of dispensationalism, but so many people, if I say I'm dispensational, they go, oh, well, I don't agree with premillennialism, or I'm Amil. And it's like, right. That's nice. That has nothing to do with it.
Everything is spiritual.
That's like saying I eat fruit. Oh, I can't eat apples.
Well, what I was going to say to that is it's not there. There's what they think they're talking about, and there's the issue at hand. So people often think they're talking about those pre-trib, premillennialists. Now, there is historic premillennialism, which in historic premillennialism, you don't have to have the same conclusions as someone who believes in pre-trib. Now, with that, just throw out there, I am with you. I don't throw all my cards into the eschatological view, category. I'm really into soteriology. I'm really into Christology. I love typology. I love it. I don't get big into eschatology. I love ecclesiology, but I don't get huge into eschatology. But I kind of know where I fall into that. I actually don't know if you've heard of pre-wrath. I'm sure you have. Mm-hmm. I'm more into the pre-wrath view, and I think it kind of synergizes pre-trib, mid-trib, and post-trib quite beautifully, actually, in such a way where you kind of make sense of all of that, and then everyone can get along, and you can delete some of these Facebook groups online that where it's like, oh, it's pre-trib, oh, it's post-trib.
Developed by a Jewish guy, by the way.
Oh, interesting. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, Marv Rosenthal. Yeah.
Oh, yes. Yeah. And actually, it was my dad who got me into the pre-wrath view. So pre-wrath is you're going to face tribulation. By the way, Christians already face tribulation. So you're going to face tribulation, but you won't face God's wrath. So it kind of just splits up some of the...
But Adam, what Christians in America call tribulation is not really tribulation. Oh, that person won't friend me on Facebook. That person won't talk to me. I'm being persecuted. Grow up. What you need to do, why
don't you be a Christian in a village in Nigeria where the Muslims are going house to house and murdering everyone?
Murdering them. Yeah. That's what real persecution is.
That's tribulation.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to clear that up. So just for those who are listening, dispensationalism is a hermeneutic. It is not an end times view.
Correct.
It's a hermeneutic that will lead to specific views about the end times. For example, the restoration of Israel as a nation. It will lead to that. It will lead to, in a lot of cases, a belief in a pre-trib rapture. Right? That's a fair comment to make. And there are some other things that will get wrapped into that. And so with that, I want to actually take note of an interesting interview that took place between Tucker Carlson and Ted Cruz. Ted Cruz, he grew up in a church that appears to have been a church that teaches from a dispensational mindset. And he went ahead and he's like, I'm taking on the view that Israel is God's chosen people. The Jews are God's chosen people. And the Bible says, whoever blesses Israel, I will bless. This is God speaking. Whoever curses them, I will curse. He takes that view. Tucker Carlson has a different view. And there's this very interesting conversation that takes place between the two of them. So Andrew and I, we're going to go through it. We're going to kind of talk through this. So there will be times where we'll pause the video, but I want to give kind of a cultural commentary on what you're seeing in this conversation, because it's quite interesting. I think what you're seeing between Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson in this clip that we're going to watch is literally what's playing out in the church right now between the covenant side and the dispensational side. So I'm going to go ahead.
And Tucker, I believe, is post-millennial. I want to believe both of them are brothers in Christ. I don't know either of them personally, and I think that when I look at it, just listening to the way, Ted Cruz talks, he'll talk about religion, but he doesn't. Neither one of them talk like they really are a believer. Like,
right.
It's to me, it just seems like they go to church. It's cultural. It impacts the way they view things. It's different with like a Charlie Kirk who will go on a campus and preach the gospel, right? Yeah. I don't hear either of these guys preaching the gospel. They preach more Christianity in a cultural way, in my opinion. But I don't know either of them personally.
I actually agree with you very strongly. I have no good reason, based on what I have seen from both of them, to believe that they are regenerate Christians. I have no good reason to believe that.
And I don't have a good reason to deny it either.
Yeah. So it's more like, okay, these are two guys who are talking about an issue that has been very prevalent in the church today, and taking on some very... If I had a bingo card, I would have never had Tucker Carlson talking about dispensationalism on a bingo card for 2025. That's just bizarre to me. So anyway, I'm going to pull that video up. We can get right into it. Oh, there we go. We'll get right into it, and I'll just tell you when to pause because I think it's coming from your end. Yep. So go ahead and press play.
Let's get into Iran momentarily, but you suggested it was a strange thing that I said a minute ago, that when I came into the Senate, I resolved that I was going to be the leading defender of Israel. And what you didn't ask is why. So let me tell you why.
No, you said I was obsessed with Israel, and you had just told me that like your driving motive to get to the Senate was to defend Israel. I'm like, I don't think I'm the one who's obsessed with Israel.
Okay,
so
Tucker, words matter.
Uh-huh.
And you know
Hold on a minute. Can you press pause real quick? That's interesting that he said words matter, because you were just talking about that. That words matter. But and just before we go any further, I am frustrated by Tucker Carlson in this particular clip. He's just very bellicose. He laughing Ted Cruz off. And by the way, Ted Cruz wasn't all that impressive either, but I'm just saying I may have somewhat of a negative bent toward Ted Cruz, or not Ted Cruz, but Tucker Carlson as we go, just because I don't know, something has changed in him. I find that, whenever he is being pushed back on, he just laughs in this bellicose way, as if somehow that makes his position stronger. I don't know, but it's kind of annoying. So I'm sorry if you share that same perspective, but this is an interesting video to get into nonetheless. You want to go ahead and press play again?
And for the record, I have not watched this. Okay. I've heard some clips on different talk shows. I've listened to Ted Cruz's podcast, so I heard his view of how this went. I actually have yet to watch this. I mean, you said you wanted it. We downloaded it so we could play it, and It's the first time actually watching it. So, so you get live reaction.
Yes,
but
live reaction.
To what you said, I do want to say that there is the possibility. Look, Tucker Carlson is in media, okay, and so some of the clips I heard, I wonder if he was saying the things he said for the sake of cessationism to get the media attention. I mean, from what I understand from Ted Cruz, there was a period where he's like, we shouldn't bomb Iraq, shouldn't bomb Iraq, shouldn't bomb Iraq. And then, Ted Cruz ends up saying, well, they were threatening our president. And he's like, well, then we should bomb them. It was like, if I haven't watched it, but if he did that much of a flip, that becomes very interesting.
Yeah, agreed.
So here we go. We'll play.
Leading defender of Israel. And you said your driving motive, the reason you're in the Senate.
You want to be the leading defender of Israel. I would think if I ran for Senate, I'd be like, there are people dying of drug abuse on the street.
My driving motive is to fight for Texas and America, and to fight for jobs, and to fight for the Constitution. And you played a very, very careful word game of eliding.
You're the one who said it, not me.
So you still haven't asked why, but I'm going to tell you why.
Okay.
And the reason is twofold. Number one, as a Christian, growing up in Sunday school, I was taught from the Bible, those who bless Israel will be blessed, and those who curse Israel will be cursed. And from my perspective, I want to be on the blessing side of things.
Of those who bless the government of Israel?
Those who bless Israel is what it says. It doesn't say the government of it, says the nation of Israel.
This is a good one to pause at.
Bible, as a Christian.
So that is a very important point to bring up here, because what that question that Tucker asks, if you bless the government of Israel, the question comes, if I support Israel, am I supporting the government of Israel, or should there even be a distinction? There's kind of a theological wordplay that takes place here. And Andrew, I was just wondering, is there anything that you would like to add to that? Because I'm sure that you've run into this particular thing. So if I don't bless the government of Israel, then I'm not a Christian. Or and really another question is Ted Cruz even using that verse correctly? I think he's using some verses from Genesis, and I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think that, and I've heard this clip a couple times. This is the big one that people were playing, and I think where it gets interesting is, and I find it interesting that neither of them knew what the passage was. Now, I will admit, from what I heard in the clips, Tucker Carlson is going to give Ted Cruz a hard time for not knowing where the passage is, but he didn't know where it was either. Right? So don't give someone a hard time. Or and that's where I go. I think, look, both of them are good at debating, and there's some debate tactics going on. Okay. Ted Cruz saying, well, as a Christian, he knows Tucker claims to be a Christian. So whether he's doing it as a debate tactic, I don't know, but it's like, hey, you should be agreeing with me on this. The issue is how in the Old Testament is that? Well, it's in the context of all these countries, tribes, nations around Israel, and the idea that, God was going to very clearly, as demonstrated in book of Exodus, Numbers, that those who were going to come up against Israel, no, they didn't do too well, because God was going to fight for Israel as a nation. And we see that historically. A great example of that is Numbers 22 to 25. And that's with the account of Balaam. Now, most people know of Balaam because of the talking donkey. Okay? But Balaam was a Gentile who was a prophet for God. He goes and Balak wants him to curse Israel as they're coming into the land. And he just can't do it. But he wanted the money that was being offered. And so what he does is, and this is Numbers 25, but we don't see Numbers 25 attributed to Balaam until later in the scriptures. And so what you have there is Balaam wants the money. He figures he knows God will not curse Israel. So what does he do? He counsels Balak, the king, to say, hey, take some of your women, give them to the men, and God will curse Israel. Right? He knew God would bring that judgment, but he didn't want to be the one because he wanted the money that Balak had offered. Right? And yet he wants to be spiritual and not go against God. So it's like he tries to find a way he can have both. And that's, I think, what it's referring to is the fact that if you're going to come up against Israel while God is defending them, you're going to lose.
Right.
But when God is judging them, I mean, look, what was Nebuchadnezzar? He was God's judgment on Israel. What was Assyria? God's judgment on Israel. And God would use other nations who were not looking to bless Israel, but they weren't looking to do it, but God was using them this way to be an act of judgment on his right arm of justice against the nation of Israel. And the purpose of both of those were very clear in Scripture to basically knock out the idolatry that Israel had. And to date, Israel as a ethnicity, Judaism, as a nation, doesn't have where they chase after the gods of the neighbors around them. That captivity did cure them of that, as God said it would. And so I think that I don't know that I agree with Ted Cruz's interpretation of that. But it doesn't mean that Israel isn't, like, if God's going to do something with Israel in the future, then he's going to work with them.
Right.
And that's the question really that I think needs to be asked.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. We can go ahead and continue here. See what else Ted Cruz has to say.
I believe that.
Where is that?
I can find it to you. I don't have the scripture
This
off
is what you're talking about.
Pull out the phone and use the
It's in Genesis, but so you're quoting a Bible phrase. You don't have context for it and you don't know where in the Bible it is, but that's like your theology? I'm confused. What does that even mean?
Tucker.
I'm a Christian. I want to know what you're talking about.
Okay. Where does my support for Israel come from? Number one, because biblically we're commanded to support Israel. But number two,
Hold on.
Hold on.
You're a senator, and now you're throwing out theology, and I am a Christian, and I am allowed to weigh in on this. We are commanded as Christians to support the government of Israel?
We are commanded to support Israel. And what
does that mean?
You can pause right there. So that was, Ted, poor Ted. I don't think he was as prepared for that particular part of the conversation.
It's funny because he's the one that brought it up. Like,
he is.
Right? He's in this way, he's bringing up this argument.
Yeah.
And I don't think it's in numbers, by the way, just for the record. Because there's only two times it talks about blessing Israel, where you see bless and Israel together in Genesis. Did I say numbers? I meant Genesis. Genesis 48:20, which says, "And he blessed them that day, saying, by you, Israel will pronounce blessing, saying, may God make you like Ephraim and Manasseh." Thus he put Ephraim before Manasseh. That's Joseph blessing, or Jacob blessing the sons of Joseph. The other is Genesis 49:28, which just says, all these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what the Father spoke to them. So he blessed them, he blesses them, and everyone with the blessing appropriate to them. There's no command there in Genesis,
right,
to bless Israel.
Yeah, and this is why maybe Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson should stick to just talking about the political stuff and leave theology to people who really know what they're talking about. Because, like, and I found it interesting. So Ted Cruz, he's talking about, well, the Bible commands for us to support Israel, which there is no direct comment in Scripture or command in Scripture that says you must support Israel. It's a multitude of verses where, people who have this perspective, they come to that perspective based on that multitude of verses. I'm
doing a little further digging, and so maybe this is what he's referring to.
Okay,
and this is Genesis 12, verse 3. And I will bless those who bless you, and the one whom curses you I will curse, and in you all families of the earth will be blessed. That is specifically speaking to Abram, not Jacob. So, if he's going to say this is a command, it's a command to Abraham, and I think then he gets into a problematic thing if he's going to try to say that, only because then what you have is the Muslim nations would have to be blessed as well, because they're from the lineage of Abraham.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So
it's true.
I don't know that this is, I mean, this is to Abraham, not Israel. And so
Right.
if he's speaking of this one, and I don't know, that's the only one I could find in Genesis that could apply to it.
Yeah, and if this is what's there are so many conclusions being drawn from that one text based on what they're talking about here, because you have Ted Cruz saying, okay, well this verse means that I have to support Israel, and Tucker says, well, I don't see that. And you have competing, not just theologies here, but you have competing ideologies here, because that comment that Tucker made, well, it was really a question. Oh, so the Bible tells us we're supposed to support the government of Israel? That's a very libertarian argument. The Bible doesn't tell me to support the government of Israel. I have seen that come up often in these kind of conversations, particularly with those who come from a more libertarian perspective, who are skeptical of all governments, including the Israeli government. And so you see a little bit of Tucker Carlson's libertarian side coming out in that response as well. So it's kind of interesting. You're not just seeing a theology versus a theology. You're seeing also a political ideology mixed in with it as well.
I agree with you there. I think that this is somewhat of a mixing of, I don't look at either of these two men as great theologians.
No.
Good in politics, maybe not here.
Yeah. We can go ahead. Yeah.
But hold on. Define Israel. This is important. Are you kidding? This is a majority Christian country.
Define Israel. Do you not know what Israel is? That would be the country you've asked like 49 questions about.
So that's what Genesis, that's what God is talking about.
The nation of Israel, yes.
So is that the current borders, the current leadership? He's talking about the political entity called Israel?
He's talking about the nation of Israel. Yeah, nations exist, and he's discussing a nation. A nation was the people of Israel.
Is the nation
They're the
God's
descendants of
referring
Abraham.
to in Genesis, is that the same as the country run by Benjamin Netanyahu right now?
Yes.
It is. Okay.
And by the way, it's not run by Benjamin Netanyahu as a dictator. It's a democratic country that elected.
He's the prime minister,
right?
What?
But just like America is the country run by Donald Trump. No, actually, the American people elected Donald Trump. The same principle.
This is silly. I'm talking about the political entity of modern Israel.
Yes, and that is.
You believe
Israel.
That's what God was talking about in Genesis?
I do, but
that country's existed since when?
For thousands of years. Now, there was a time when it didn't exist, and then was recreated just over 70 years ago.
I'm saying.
Okay, we can pause there real quick.
Yeah.
So there's so much loaded into that. You have Ted Cruz. He's saying, I support Israel. I support, and then you have Tucker Carlson, who is breaking down Israel. He's like, okay, so define Israel. What is Israel? Is it the borders? Is it the nation? Is it the government? What is it? And I don't see the point where Tucker is going with this. And I'd like to hear some of your feedback on it, because I don't think it's necessary to split Israel up based on borders, based on the government, and based on the people. There is a general idea that Israel is the nation that covenantally came from Abraham, and Ted Cruz is going to poorly try to explain that as we go further. But the idea is that in these last days, Israel was brought back together through the providence of God, and now here we are. But I want to get more of your feedback on that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on anything.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think this is the heart of the issue of where you started the program with what we're seeing in Christianity. It is this question of what is Israel? Okay. The Israel spoken of in the scripture, right? If they're referring to Genesis, then we should be talking about Abraham, not Israel.
Yeah.
So I'm not exactly sure the passage that they're both thinking it is. They're speaking of a generality, and it's always good with scripture to talk specifics. But what is a nation, right? So Israel was a changing of a name for Jacob, right? God changes his name. It tells Abraham that through his children, he's going to be a great nation. And that's why, even though Jacob is the one that's called Israel and it's his children, they'll go back to Abraham. And yet Abraham fathered many nations. Okay. But that gets into the question, what is a nation? And this becomes really interesting as we talk about the 12-day war, but even further into Gaza and Palestine. People will talk that, Israel is occupying the Palestinian land. That land has been called Palestine since the Roman Empire as a derogatory term. In the first century, it was referred to Palestine because the Philistines were the ones who were always kind of a thorn in the side to Israel. And so the Romans called it Palestine as an insult to the Jewish people at the time. And so what you end up seeing is that before 1948, and this may shock some people, but every Jewish person that lived in that land prior to 1948 was called Palestinians. There is no Palestinian language. There's no Palestinian culture. There's no Palestinian money. There wasn't that because it was never a nation. It was after Rome that there was fighting. The Turks took it over. Then there was a World War I, and the United Kingdom took it over. They took that by warfare. And then in 1948, they decided, those who owned it. So if it was occupied by anybody, it was the United Kingdom, not Israel. And they occupied it for 30 years before they established the nation of Israel. But even though Jewish people were spread all over the world, there still was a common language. There was a common culture. There, would be all of the elements. So even though they were dispersed because of let's call it what it is, the legalism that they went through in that period that I mentioned earlier of that captivity, yes, they were cured of idolatry, but they ended up replacing it with a man-made religion of Judaism that is all works-based and legalistic. But that legalism kept them in their culture, keeping that culture alive, even when they're in captivity, even for 2,000 years.
Right.
Or almost 2,000 years.
Yeah.
So there were a people, and it was passed down generation to generation. So when we talk, what is a nation? It is, it was reformed by the United Kingdom, but it is the group of people that have not only limited to those who have the hereditary descendants of Abraham, or more specifically Jacob, but it's those who have that culture, have that are part of that came back and formed it. Now, is the Israel in the scriptures the same Israel that's in the country today? And that's really the heart of this. And I think that's where Tucker's trying to go with it. And I think, I really wish that, Ted Cruz didn't bring this whole issue up because he didn't do well in this clip. I mean, I think there's other areas that have other clips I think he did well in, but this one, I think, and it's just, he brought it up, which is even worse. He wanted to make this case. And I think he thought Tucker was going to agree with him because I think he has been in Christian circles where everybody agrees with him on this view, and he hasn't really argued other theological positions. And you can see that because when he's arguing for Israel, what is he doing? He's addressing that Netanyahu is not a dictator, which Tucker never made that claim. Okay. But why is he doing that? Well, he's doing that because there are plenty of people, liberals, who are making that claim.
Yeah.
Okay. And just like they make the claim with Trump. And if people deny that, well, we just had a No Kings protest that they thought was going to last all summer. But when people started getting arrested, they suddenly stopped, right? And when their money was when the government was going after the companies supplying all the bricks and everything, that stopped. So
I'd try Soros.
Yeah, he'll try again. Trust me. But what you have is Ted Cruz was ready to argue the political arguments against Israel. He wasn't ready to argue the theological.
No.
And I think what Tucker is doing here is trying to get to the question, what really is Israel? Is it the same? And I think in one sense, yes, and in one sense, no. Okay. It is the same that there are descendants from Jacob, the 12 tribes that have reestablished themselves, that kept that culture, have kept the language, all of that. And I think they are, in that sense, yes. Is it in the sense that they're God's chosen people like in the Old Testament? I have a harder time with that, and I did an episode of my Apologetics Live podcast where both my co-hosts disagree with me, and we talked about Israel and what is Israel. And am I in discussing, and I purposely did not talk beforehand with the co-hosts because I thought if I explained through things, what did happen would happen, which is there was a lot more agreement than disagreement. And I think that right now, the Israel, which is not just the people in the land, but Jewish people around the world, are they God's chosen people? Well, right now, they're under God's judgment. So in a redemptive way, no, there may be some like myself, the remnant that gets saved, and we would be God's chosen people in this time period. But I don't think that Israel, the nation, is the same in the same covenant relationship as they would have been in the time that they were established and coming into the land. But I do think that God will bring them back into that relationship in the future.
Yes.
And that's where we would disagree. And that's where I say, I don't think the covenant theologians should have an issue with Israel. The issue they really have is God going to bring Israel back into the center of his plan? And I think for so many, let me put it this way, Adam. You and I talked about this and our differences with, the charismatic gifts. Yeah. When I talk about charismatic gifts, there's so many charismatics that they wrap everything into their experience. And when I say that I don't think the gifts continue, the challenge I so often get is, are you saying I'm not a Christian? Because they've intertwined their experience of those gifts with their Christianity. Okay. I think what you have here and the video you wanted to play is a great example of, because I think Ted Cruz has too entwined his support for Israel into his theology. And I think Tucker represents those who have so broken that they can't see God having a future for Israel. And I think that's a lot of what you see online is people that if you say that there's going to be a future for Israel, you're questioning their whole theology, you're questioning their salvation. They've too intertwined it. And I think that is the issue. I think there's continuity and discontinuity between Israel and the church. By the way, for those who deny that, for any covenant theologians who say, no, we are the true Israel, my argument there would be, do you keep kosher as commanded in Scripture? And they're going to go, oh, well, that was done away with Christ. That's not what Scripture says. The sacrificial system, yes, but keeping kosher, no. That's to keep you holy, to keep you separate from the world, unless you think you don't need to be holy anymore. That's why in Judaism, it's called holiness laws, not some law of ceremonial law that didn't come about to the reformers. And so the other thing is, do you keep the Passover, which Israel was commanded to keep forever. And so if you're not doing that, then you're either breaking a commandment from God, or you really don't believe you're Israel. You believe there's some discontinuity between you and Israel, right? It's just how much continuity and discontinuity.
Right.
That's the struggle.
What is fulfilled, what isn't.
And let me say this with the true Israel, because I don't know if I've been on your show before, but I don't know if I've shared this. And I this helps me, and it seems to help a lot of people understand this. When we talk about true Israel and the nation of Israel, what people are doing is saying, well, not all Israel is Israel. Where? Because Paul says that that's scripture. And they say, well, the real Israel is the church. What they're doing here is, what you had in the Middle Ages was an argument being formed of what is the church. When the church was a national religion in the Roman Empire and everyone had to go to church, in fact, you didn't have a birth certificate. Your name was written in the family Bible, right? Your baptism certificate is what kind of was your birth certificate. So the nation and the religion were intertwined. And so what they ended up referring to was visible and invisible Israel, okay? Or local and universal, sorry, not Israel, church. So the local visible church is that place where everyone gathers, believers and unbelievers, on a weekly basis for the worship of God, but it's made up of believers and unbelievers. We don't know who the believers are or the unbelievers. Like we said, we don't know if Tucker and Ted Cruz are believers. We can't tell. God can tell, right? They come to church. We assume they're the church, right? So they were making a distinction between that and the true church, the universal, invisible church, that church that is made up only of believers everywhere in the world. Now, we make that distinction with the church. What the covenant theologians need to do is make that same distinction with the nation of Israel, because it applies one to one. There's a nation of Israel, the visible local nation that is made up of believers and unbelievers. Now, it's not that they're going to a building for worship. It's that they're born from a lineage. And then there's the spiritual Israel, or the universal invisible Israel, that's made up of those who are believing everywhere.
Yeah.
You see, now we can find some continuity in the spiritual Israel, spiritual church. Okay. And in that sense, I can agree. That's where I don't see it as this completely disjointed thing of Israel and church. But we have to do apples to apples. What you often hear them do is people will take that quote from Paul, not all Israel's Israel, and they focus on spiritual Israel rather than the national Israel, and they start applying spiritual Israel to things that were national. And they start making those where they want to have that distinction when it comes to the church. If you want that distinction for the church, do the same thing with the nation of Israel.
Yeah. I think we can continue, and I think we're going to get this last bit of Ted Cruz and Tucker, and then I do want to talk about a post I did recently on my Bold Apologia podcast Facebook page and just kind of go through some of the comments here. But I want to check out this last bit with Tucker.
People understand that line in Genesis to refer to the Jewish people, God's chosen people.
That's not what it says.
Okay, Israel, but you don't even know where in the Bible it is. So I don't know.
I don't remember the scriptural citation. But okay,
it's like Genesis 16 or something like that. But yes, it's in the earlier part of the book. But the point is,
all right, Tucker, you keep interrupting me before I finish my sentence.
It's important to know what you're talking about. I don't know what so you're saying as a Christian, if I believe in Jesus, I have to support the modern state of Israel?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm explaining for me what my motivation is.
But okay, so I'm just trying to understand. You said God tells you to support the modern state of Israel in the Bible, in some place in the Bible that you heard about, but you don't know where it is. That's your theology?
You're going back, am I a sleazy feline again? I mean,
if you accuse me of anti-Semitism again, I will say that, but I don't think you will.
Try to be a little less condescending. I'm trying to have a conversation.
Condescending, you're throwing this stuff out, and it's my job to figure out what you're talking about, and I don't understand.
But you're not letting me.
Okay. I'm sorry. I want to be polite.
Let me just pause and say this at this point. Like, let's see this. They're both guilty of this.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, as an interviewer, Tucker should let him finish his point.
Yes.
He's got a valid point. He's saying, hey, I'm interjecting because I want to understand. And I think that's legitimate too.
It'll be easier to understand if you let him complete a full thought as well. You know what he reminds me of? There was an interview a number of years ago between Jordan Peterson and a woman, Kathy Newman. Tucker Carlson is the conservative Kathy Newman. You can quote me on that. Just cutting him off left and right. And I will say this: I would not put Ted Cruz and Jordan Peterson on the same kind of intellectual totem pole by any means, but just making the point. He's cutting Tucker is cutting Ted Cruz off quite a bit.
Yeah, and Ted isn't a very good debater. I mean, he is. I mean, yes. He's a good debater, and when people do debates, especially when you're trained in high school, college, doing on debate class like he was, there's debate tactics, and some of it good, some of it not. I mean, he's calling Tucker out for the interruptions. I think that's fair. Tucker's doing debate tactics as well, possibly in the as you point out, the laughing, because I think Tucker is trying to seize on what Ted is saying without having to actually engage with it, because I think he's not so comfortable with this either. Mm-hmm. Okay. And I think he's just trying to move on and get to an area where I think, personally, I think he wants to get to an area he knows better. But I'll keep playing now for
that makes sense.
For what you might have wanted.
Mm-hmm. That is, for me, a personal motivation. But I also, what I was about to say, I don't believe my personal faith, not everyone who I represent is a Christian. It's not an argument for me to give that we should do this because of my faith. And so as an elected official, I don't give that as the reason we should support Israel. That is a personal motivation for me, but I don't think it is the reason we should. The reason that I am the leading defender of Israel is because Israel is our strongest ally in the Middle East, an incredibly troubled part of the world, and supporting Israel benefits America. And the clearest illustration of that is what is happening right now. Let me just make this point, and then,
and then I'll just ask what you mean. That's it.
Okay. Yeah. Look, Iran, I think the most acute national security threat facing America right now is the threat of a nuclear Iran. I think China is the biggest long-term threat, but acute and near-term is a nuclear Iran.
Okay.
And I think Israel is doing a massive favor to America right now by trying to take out Iran's nuclear capacity. And the reason I view Iran differently, we talked before about Iraq. I opposed the Iraq war. We talked about Syria. I opposed military intervention in Syria. The reason for that is those did not pose a threat to the United States. I think Iran is markedly different. Number one, the Ayatollah is a religious zealot. He is a lunatic, but a particularly dangerous kind of lunatic, because he's driven by religious fervor. When he says death to America and death to Israel, I believe him. And I think Iran is trying to get a nuclear weapon because there is a very real possibility they would use a nuclear weapon. So you want to ask, how does supporting Israel benefit us? Right now, this tiny little country, the size of the state of New Jersey, is fighting our enemies for us and taking out their top military leadership and trying to take out their nuclear capacity. That makes America much safer.
Yeah. So I wanted to get to that point. We actually don't need to go any further with this particular video, because this is where I want to talk and reflect on the 12-day war together. There is a post I had made. I was baffled at the amount of, and I'm using this rhetorically, the hate that Israel got over this, or the negative feedback Israel got over attacking Iran. Oh, you're attacking a non-aggressor, which is a lie, by the way, because Iran has been attacking Israel for years through proxies. In fact, that's what happened October 7th, it was Iranian proxies that Iran funds that attacked Israel, whether you want to accept that or not.
Hezbollah and Hamas, it's between 65 to 85% of their budget comes from Iran.
Yeah, and so this 12-day war, basically Israel, from what I understand, they wanted to go in and take out Iran's nuclear abilities or capabilities much sooner, but President Trump said, no, let's wait 60 days. On day 61, that is when Israel attacked. And why was there a waiting of 60 days? Trump wanted to discuss peace. He wanted to see if we'd come to a resolution here where Iran puts aside its nuclear program and we all get to the table and negotiate peace. Iran did not want that. Iran has repeatedly stated its intentions to destroy Israel, to destroy America repeatedly. And now this crazy, and I agree with Ted on this, this crazy man, the Ayatollah Khamenei. Ayatollah Khamenei is closer than ever to a nuclear weapon, and people will have their issues with that comment. Oh, what do you mean close? They've been saying this for the last 20 years or whatever. Okay, whatever. They are at a place where Israeli intelligence felt threatened enough to where they were ready to go in and attack and enter into this war. Now, here's the thing. Ted Cruz said something interesting. Israel is the size of the state of New Jersey, if not maybe smaller. I don't know.
It's about the same size of the communist country known as New Jersey.
Yeah. So it's about the same size. And this little country is going to go attack a much larger country that has 92 million people in it. So they're now, does Israel have better technology? Yes. And did they absolutely spank Iran? Absolutely. But they obviously had a motivation behind what they were doing. Let's just say that. Now, let me bring all this together. Trump said, give me 60 days. Israel came in on day 61, did what they did because they were legitimately threatened by Iran. Iran had already been attacking them through proxies. This is a known fact. And the Israelis had every right to go in and do what they felt was best for their country, especially with a country who has attacked them before. And so I just want to get that off my chest. Is there anything you'd like to talk about before I pull up this post that I did recently?
Yeah, there's a bunch there. So, okay, so first off, to the argument that you made, people will say, well, they've been at this for 20 years. Okay, so they wanted to get nukes. Barack Obama helped them along, gave them lots of money. Just like Bill Clinton did for North Korea. I don't know why it is the Democrats want to fund our enemies and help them. It's like they feel like, oh, well, if they have nukes like we do, we'll all get along. Has that worked ever? No. They have been at it for a long time. So it's been going on. Why don't they have the nukes today? Because of Israel. See, Israel actually, they were close to getting the uranium enriched enough. But Israel, with their intelligence, and they basically had hacked the computers and overspun the centrifuges so that they all destroyed themselves. Okay? So Israel had hacked them and destroyed it. And it took this long to rebuild it. Now, if you're going to say, well, how do we know? Because truthfully, have you seen the intel? No, I'm sure you haven't. But I can tell you this, even if I haven't seen the latest intel, their intel seems to be pretty good, that they know exactly where all the leaders are sleeping at night, that they could shoot missiles that you talk about precision. They went through people's bedrooms' windows to blow them up. They knew exactly where they were sleeping. That's pretty good intel, right? Guys that are running around trying to hide, and they could do it all within an hour. Okay. Yeah. Their intel is superb. And that's why I agree with what Ted said at the end there. I'm saying this as someone who is an Israelite, who is a dispensationalist. I do not think the United States government should be supporting Israel for a religious reason. I think that would be a violation of our Constitution. Okay, now people are going to say, "Oh, well, you should be a Christian before American." Well, the law says, first off, I don't believe there's a command, as Ted says, that we have to bless Israel, and then we have to start interpreting what that means. So I'd first have to get that verse, because if it's the verse, Tucker said Genesis 16. I read the one from Genesis 12, and that's talking about Abraham. I don't think it's a command. I think it's a generality for a time that they were going to go through 400 some years later. And so I don't know if that applies to us today, okay, to bless Israel. So the point there is, I don't think that you can say that that's a command from God for us to do. Now, someone could correct me and tell me I'm wrong. But if it's not a command, then we go with a command, Romans 13, that we follow the law. And the law of the land for America is the Constitution. And so we should not be defending Israel for that purpose. However, as Ted Cruz said, Israel is our best ally in a region where they want to, in some areas, want to blow us up. We were attacked on, September. I know some of you may not even know this date, but September 11th, 2001. Some may not even be old enough to have been born then. Getting
I was
old.
in kindergarten, I think.
Yeah. Wow. Thanks. But the thing being is, when you look at that, here you have a country that's an ally of ours that has defended us there and helped us there. And we've always put restrictions on them. They go to these countries that attack them and they start fighting back. And because Israel has such precision and force when they go to war, everyone jumps at ceasefire, because they start wiping people out quickly. That's why they had a 6-day war. This is referred to as the 12-day war. It was 12 days for Israel. America got involved, and it was a 1-day war. I mean, so people, now there's all the debate of whether we really did any damage there. Look, ever since Barack Obama, they have been delay. Trump basically said to Israel, finish the job.
Yeah.
Okay. And then they go after Iran to finish the job. And what happens? We get involved because there's the areas are under, I don't know if you understand this, but the guys who built these weapons have been working on it for 15 years, specifically for this one purpose.
Which is incredible.
Yeah. 15 years of development. And this is what they've done day in and day out for 15 years, was develop.
Did you see the simulation of the missile entering? It was, I believe it was a simulation of how the missile enters. It doesn't leave a crater.
Yeah.
It goes into the earth and then
it digs through the earth.
Yeah.
And so they're looking at the pictures going, oh, it doesn't look like anything happened. And yeah, it wouldn't, because of the way it was designed. But the thing is, you look at that, and all of a sudden, why do I think there was a ton of damage? Because the next day, what do they do? Iran calls the United States to let them know where they're going to send some missiles. You don't do that in warfare. You do that when you want to say, hey, we need to talk tough and talk tough to our people. We got to save face and show. So we're going to warn you, and Israel, and why was Trump so upset? Israel knew that those were coming, and then and went sending in missiles of their own and Air Force anyway, right? Yeah. And so it was like, hey, back off, stop, right?
Right.
And so the thing is, what do you see? The fact that Iran is calling for a ceasefire, that's the evidence that we wiped them out.
Yes.
Because they wouldn't do that otherwise. They would do what they've done with every other president. Well,
in the report that the media was gushing, oh yes, we did nothing, and the damages were minimal. Well, okay, and I like what Secretary Hegseth had to say about that. It's based on linchpin assumptions, where if your assumption is wrong, everything else is wrong too.
Yeah. So,
and it was an initial assessment, and there's low confidence in that assessment that was made.
Let me answer this from my background. So I actually have a background of developing intel that did go to PBDs. That would be a President Daily Briefing. Okay, so I've gathered intel that has gone to both President George W. Bush and Barack Obama. Okay. When you first have an incident happen, there's a ton of intel. You're going through lots of it, and so there's basically they're going to put markers on it. Do you have a strong confidence, weak confidence? There's going to be different things. This intel, and Hesef brought this up, the fact that it says there's low confidence in it. Why? Because there is, as you mentioned, hinge pins. In that case, it's like, well, if this isn't true, the whole thing is false. But there were like a dozen of them in this case. So like any of these things that if any of these different things are not true, the whole thing is false. That's why it's low confidence. But it's just, hey, looking just at this one thing. And what they're doing when they do this is you look at one thing, because what you're trying to do is evaluate it from every angle. And because you don't want to miss anything. Okay. And so what you're doing is you get the intel, you're trying to, so what they're having a limited intel, just looking at the pictures. And as you mentioned, these bombs are not going to leave a crater. So just looking at the pictures, they're going, well, we don't see the crater, so it wouldn't be, here be all these reasons. Yeah. Right? They're ignoring the fact that Israel, who has had really good intel, I mean, enough that they know where everyone's sleeping. The fact that Iran came out a day later after this supposed intel and said we were heavily damaged, that's no longer saving face.
Yeah.
Right? Ignore all that because we hate Trump. And that's the thing. And this gets to the same thing we started with. When you have just a blind hatred for Trump, that you're going to start supporting Iran. It's the same thing as when you have a blind view that that the church is the true Israel, that you ignore what's actually going on in the world and ignore the nation of Israel that exists today.
Right.
It's that same blind mentality where you're so busy trying to defend and fight for something that you can't even see what's happening right in front of you.
And this is a good opportunity to throw a little shade at the left here, because the left is like, oh, how dare these evil, Israelis go and attack Iran. Iran wasn't doing anything. They had proxies. They were always sending proxies out, but they weren't doing anything wrong. And it's like, you're standing up for Iran, who is sending the Shahed drones to Russia so Russia can bomb the heck out of Ukraine, who you also support. Like, are you seeing the problem here? Are you?
No, they're not.
They're not, because they can't, because they really do have Trump derangement syndrome. It's insane. It is insane. You can't think straight because one man is involved. It's just crazy.
The funniest meme that I saw was someone that put a meme, and it's a caricature of Trump, and it's him rubbing his hands together going, and just like that, I can get the liberals to defend Iran. I mean, it really is like, look, why was everyone wearing masks during COVID? Because Trump wouldn't.
Yeah.
I mean, people were sitting there when Trump suggested that people wear masks. Everyone was saying he shouldn't. Fauci was saying masks won't do anything. And then they asked him, and I still remember the interview. They said, to Trump, why don't you wear a mask? And he's like, well, I'm far enough away from everybody that I don't see the need for it. And suddenly everyone, even Fauci changes and everyone's got to wear a mask.
Yeah. That's
great. I mean, I just wish Trump would start like supporting, government school indoctrination, start supporting, abortion. So, because then the left will be all against it. And if you want proof of that, they're burning Teslas,
which they were all for at one point. They're like, oh, this is the future of vehicles. We're going to save the earth.
Yeah. And now let's burn them all.
Yeah.
And which does far worse to the environment, burning those batteries.
It's just bizarre and crazy. And I want to pull up this post here. I don't know if you can see it or not, but I'm just going to go ahead I'm going to go ahead and read here. This is what I said. And this was in response to some of the crazy stuff that not just liberals, but even libertarians and some, I would call them conservatarians, who are conservatives that have some very like libertarian like views. I would maybe
and by the way, I mean, we're sorry. Trump Elon Musk, these guys, Joe Rogan, they're not conservatives.
No.
They're libertarians.
Yes.
People don't realize that.
Yeah. But here's my post here, and I'm trying to make an analogy. I said, if Venezuela openly declared hatred for the United States, vowed to wipe us off the map, supported terrorist groups to attack us, operated through hostile proxies, and was driven by an ideology completely opposed to our values, and on top of that, was close to fully developing a nuclear bomb, I would fully expect our government to take decisive action. That would include destroying their nuclear capabilities and neutralizing their military threat. Israel has every right to do the same with Iran. Full stop. The Iranian government is not a victim. I don't know why this is so hard for people both on the right and the left to understand. And boy, did people let me have it for saying that. I'm sure.
I was just going to say, you got a lot of hatred from that.
I got so much. Just right off the bat, I've got a comment here from Maximilian Jackson. Sure, but leave America out of it. Oh, and not to mention, but Israel has been saying Iran is close to a nuclear and it's kind of a spelling or a grammar error here, but close to a nuclear bomb for decades now. And
we answered that, right? They were, and it got destroyed and they started over. And so what happened? You had Obama funding it. It gets destroyed. Trump wasn't going to refund it. So it took Biden to refund it.
Right.
He released all the money that ended up being used for, the October 7th attack. So when you say keep America out of it, I'd argue America was the cause of it. The attack on Israel on October 7th was funded by Iran with money that was released to them from the United States.
Yeah.
So if they didn't release that money, there would never have been an October 7th attack. So when you say keep America out of it, I wish America would have stayed out of it.
Right. I got another comment here from this profile is called Mike Cuts Lawns, and he says, from what I see
for a living.
What's that?
I wonder what he does for a living.
He might be doing, I'm pretty sure it's like lawn care.
Yeah, that's my guess.
Yeah. From what I see, the issue isn't with a country acting in its best interests. So right off the bat, he and I disagree completely. But he said it's with that country trying to drag other countries into it. Using your analogy, how should the people of Brazil react when the United States requests they help support the attacks on Venezuela by the United States? Keep in mind the United States is in the middle of destroying Canada and has also launched attacks on Panama, Cuba, and Mexico in the last 2 years. All of that is related to some of the issues related to October 7th. So he's trying to take my analogy and give a negative twist toward Israel and how Israel has responded to some of the issues taking place with October 7th and things like that. And I just want to read my response and let you react to this. But my response is basically, you may have misunderstood the point I was making. I'm not advocating for U.S. involvement in another war, nor am I defending any broader military agenda. My comments were about Israel's right to defend itself against a regime that has openly vowed to destroy it, funds proxy terrorism, and is nearing nuclear capability. That's the issue I'm addressing, not whether the U.S. should get involved. Your analogy breaks down for a few reasons. First, Israel is not currently destroying multiple neighboring countries. It is taking out targets within those countries who have actively attempted to harm its people, targets of which those countries actively protect and help. Furthermore, Israel is not in the midst of some imperialist conquest. That part of your example is an exaggeration not grounded in reality. Second, self-defense against an existential threat is not the same as a campaign of aggression. Iran funds Hezbollah, Hamas, and other hostile forces. It has directly and indirectly attacked Israel for decades. Israel responding to that is not the same as the U.S. inventing a war against Venezuela while attacking half the continent. Lastly, your Brazil comparison fails because I never mentioned coalition building or dragging other nations in. My point was singular and specific. If a country is faced with annihilation by a hostile, ideologically extreme regime on the brink of going nuclear, it has every moral and strategic right to strike preemptively. That's it. And I asked them, let's stay focused on what's actually happening and avoid building hypotheticals that distort the situation. My hypothetical was meant to make a point that is accurate to what's going on, not meant to be a distortion. But what's some of your feedback to that?
Scroll back up to his original thing so I can address some of his points, because there's a couple things he has here. One, what he ignores is the fact that Israel and America are allies.
Yeah.
We didn't go to war. We never declared war like Israel did. We were asked by a ally to use weapons that we had and they didn't. No different than, and I'm sure if he's going to be consistent, he has been very upset with the billions of dollars that went to our Ukraine, right? I doubt it. We spent billions of dollars, and folks, we sent troops without a declaration of war. Yeah, that's a violation. The violation that the Democrats were all up in arms because we sent missiles. Well, that's actually under the president's direction. Sending troops is not. Biden put troops, men on the ground in Ukraine. Oh, they claim they were just training. Yeah, they were fighting. And so the fact is that they broke the law, getting us involved. The fact that there is a Ukraine war is because Biden was like, well, Russia, if you go this far, I won't do anything. So they said, well, great, we'll go in because you're not going to do anything. Maybe if he talked tough like Trump, there wouldn't be that one. But when you talk about bringing us into a war and nation building, that's what we see in Ukraine. And we see that in Ukraine because they had blackmail information on Biden, right? And by the way, 10 billion of that money that we sent over there came back to support the 2022 elections.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's crazy.
You know, we can kind of see what was really going on there, and yet you don't hear the complaints about that. And so what you have is a country that was an ally asking for specific technical expertise that we had, and they have been providing us with specific technical expertise in intel that they have for years. Okay, so what you have is when it says acting, you know, when they're acting in a nation building, we're not nation building. It was send a couple bombs, done, over. Okay, take out the targets, bring them to their knees so that they would come to negotiate, and that's what ended up happening. Now, when he says, keep in mind the U.S. is in the middle of destroying Canada, and he's making the comparison, how are we destroying Canada? We're destroying Canada by saying that they have to be fair with their tariffs, so they could take advantage of the tariffs that we have to pay them, but they don't want to reciprocate in the tariffs. That's not the same as going to a rave and killing people, taking them hostage, taking their babies and sticking them in ovens and making parents watch, taking a kid to have to go to the neighbor's house to knock on the door so that they can get them to open the door so that they can rape the women, kill the people in front of family, and make mothers watch their children being butchered.
Yeah, that's terrible.
There's a big difference between that and doing a economic negotiation over tariffs. As far as Panama, we're basically saying, hey, we gave you this, we never charged you for it, but the idea was that it would be fair, and you're having our enemy come in and use that to prevent us from being able to defend our country. So that is kind of us holding them to the agreement that was made. That's not destroying them, launching attacks on Panama. And Cuba, we didn't launch anything there. Mexico, what are these attacks? Mexico has been sending people in. If you don't know, if you came to the southern border of Mexico saying you want to come to America, they stuck you on a bus and brought you right in. They would fund it. So they're, kind of saying, hey, we're going to talk tough with you, is protecting our national security. That is a direct interest of America.
And I think when I read this, I interpreted it as he was trying to analogize U.S. and then neighboring countries.
Yeah, but see, it
as
doesn't
a way
work
to attack Israel,
because
Israel attacks all these neighboring countries.
But it's not the same thing, because we're making trade agreements with Canada.
Yep.
Iran is sending people in to kill people. If you can't see the difference there, then there's no rational discussion that can occur.
Yep.
Like if I saw that, I probably would have just said, yeah, you're just not rational. Stick to cutting lawns, Mike. Maybe you do that well, but thinking is not your strong suit here.
Right. I want to read something by Maximilian Jackson.
And I'll say this: if he disagrees with me, anyone's welcome to join Apologetics Live. Just go to Apologetics Live Thursday nights, 8 to 10 Eastern time. We're live there. We answer any questions. Anyone can come in. We don't kick anyone out. Well, sometimes, but that's only when they prove themselves to be completely rude. But anyone can come in and make their arguments. And so if you want to prepare to debate me, go for it. Yeah. You can be prepared, and I won't even be prepared for the debate.
Yep. Yeah, I've paid attention to Apologetics Live for a little while now, and but remember, if you have any questions, he'll answer all of them. But
I can answer every question you have about God and the Bible.
But I don't know is perfectly fine, right? Yeah.
I don't know is a perfectly good answer.
Yep. There you go.
Never say it's going to be a satisfactory answer. I can just answer.
Yeah, right. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do. I just want to read this comment by Maximilian Jackson.
Oh, that's a long
one. It is a long one. It will react on it, and then I think we'll wrap up because I think for the most part we have accomplished what I wanted to accomplish. I wanted to clarify a few things regarding Israel. What is Israel? What is dispensationalism? And what is the 12-day war all about? What are we seeing? What is actually happening versus all of these different opinions? Like what we saw with Tucker Carlson is what we're seeing on the internet is two people talking past each other. That's really what it was. If you want to really summarize Ted Cruz versus Tucker, and by the way, I know people, shout out to Mike Young, the charismatic cheetah. He thinks Tucker Carlson was brilliant in that interview. And for me, I don't, and I love you, buddy, bro, but we just disagree. I don't think that was a bright moment for Tucker. All he did was talk past his opponent, Ted Cruz there, and Ted Cruz was talking past his opponent. And what we need is real reflection on what the other side is saying. That's just so important for this topic. Mm-hmm. And things are veering out in left field.
Let me say this before you get to post is why did Trump call it the 12-day war? Because everyone was so afraid, we're going to World War III. It's going to be forever war. That's how they were saying it. Yeah. The reason he called it a 12-day war is to make the point, it's done. It's over. We did what we did. Everyone's pulling back. Now it's time for negotiations and peace, right? So calling it the 12-day war says it's over, right? That's the whole thing. And back to the Trump derangement syndrome, you have the left now wanting to argue whether it was any good. So literally, one of the other funniest posts I saw this past week was someone posted, the day before the bombing, CNN says that Iran is years away from nuclear weapons. The day after the bombing, we did nothing. They can have nukes tomorrow, right? and so they're instead of just saying, "Hey, we're done with it," because they kept saying we're going to be in war forever. Now what are they doing? They're saying, "Well, we didn't do anything. We didn't accomplish anything," because they want to ignore the success that occurred.
Yeah,
and that it's over.
And reading Maximilian's comment here, he brought up what he said about Israel being close to nuclear weapons, and I said, close could mean a number of things. I mean, sorry, Iran being close to nuclear weapons, not Israel. I said close could mean a number of things. If a country that hates me is 3 years away from a nuclear weapon, I think that's close. That's really close. Granted, there's a lot of details that go into this.
Well, even 4 years, because that's a different president. If you had another Joe Biden,
then we're toast. We're done.
Yeah, because they're not going to do anything.
Yeah. So there's that. But I needed to make it clear that I'm not for us going into war. And I think you are in the same spot there. You're not for us going into war. With that said, we did what we did, and we were effective. And I think Trump made the right decision. He made the right decision with what he did, despite the what's a good word for it? The meltdown that the libertarian side of the Trump wing had over the situation. It actually went quite well. And there was no regime change. There is no forever war, like you said. And, he's like, in my mind, close can only mean one thing if I am using that as a decider of whether or not to start a war. And yes, so essentially he's saying close means I'm saying this so I can go to war. That's not the case. He's speaking out of his own ignorance here, but he says, and yes, I've heard multiple people say that Iran is weak, but then those same people say Israel is right to be worried by it. Which is it? Well, dude, Iran has the ability to get nukes. They're so close. Of course they should be afraid of that.
Well, they were, but there's a different aspect. They were weak, and then we strengthened them. America did when Biden gave them billions of dollars.
Yeah.
So if you're going to blame someone, blame the Biden administration, whoever was controlling the auto pen, for releasing that money.
Absolutely. His critique of Israel is this: Israel should be seeking a better future with its neighbors, including Iran.
Okay, hold on. I got to interrupt there because they are. It's called the Abrahamic Accords that, by the way, there's talk. The rumor is Syria and Libya are going to join that accord. So Trump not only got 4 of the countries around Israel to do a peace deal on his first term, he may get some of the biggest enemies of Israel coming to a peace agreement now.
Yeah.
So there's rumor there's 4 more countries that want to be added. So thanks. The bombing did it.
Yes. And he's like, well, you shouldn't make Iran weak and defenseless. Well, Iran is an enemy. They should be weak and defenseless. Iran was already pretty weak. But this is the kicker, though. He says, that's not how a nation works. Imagine if Europe ran that way. That's what Hitler tried to do. It's like, dude. And by the way, like, I talk about this very thing in my response, which is also another really long response, and I won't try to get into that. But I say, finally, your Hitler comparison is historically ridiculous. Hitler wasn't trying to keep the peace by weakening dangerous regimes. He was the dangerous regime, slaughtering millions and conquering neighbors. You inverted the story entirely. Like, he's going to go and compare Hitler to Israel.
Well, there's a big difference there, and and this may seem odd, but because I think a lot of people misunderstand Hitler. Hitler was unlike Israel. Israel's not trying to take these countries over to occupy them. Okay, Israel's trying to defend itself against enemies. Hitler was trying to take over what he thought was German territory, and he was doing it through peaceful means until it couldn't be peaceful anymore.
Yeah.
Okay. And so when he went into Paris, because of treaties that Paris had with other countries, it brought the UK into war. Not that they wanted to, but because of treaties, they had to. I think Hitler would have been fine with trying to take over all those countries without war if he could. But the killing of the people was mostly the Jewish people, but that had a totally different purpose. That's what unified a very fractured Germany in giving them a common enemy. And what he got into power with, the blaming of Jewish people for all the ills of Germany, that he had to stay in power with by continuing it. And it got to the point where he was killing millions of Jewish people. But the war was a kind of a separate thing. See, that was something of him just trying to, in his mind, take over the countries that should have been German. Israel's not doing that.
It's a ridiculous comparison, but I guess you can make any comparison as long as it's against Israel. I
forget who it is that says once someone brings up Hitler, the conversation's done.
Right. Yeah, that's a good point. That's a good point, and that's actually a good point on both sides, because there is a number of people out there where if you criticize Israel at all, then you support Hitler, and that's just not true.
Yeah.
You can criticize Israel. It is okay to criticize Israel, as long as you've got a good reason for it. This is not a good reason to criticize Israel at all. This is ridiculous. I want to keep reading here just to give you an idea. He says, I think Israel could easily deal with its Iran problem and leave Iran and its nuclear program alone. That's just laughable, by the way. If it would agree to a two-state Palestinian solution. Israel has already tried to do that.
So the reality is, for folks that don't understand, there is a two-state solution right now. It's called Hamas. It's actually a three-state solution. It's Hamas and it's Hezbollah. So Israel has the land. They gave that land over to those people to govern. And by the way, there were people forcibly removed from the land. Yet Gaza was this wonderful area, and many Jewish people were forcibly removed by the Israeli army out of their homes that had been in their homes for generations, so that the people that are there now could run it themselves. There's a three-state solution. It hasn't worked. And by the way, Iran doesn't want a two-state or three-state solution. They want a one-state solution. They're the ones calling for the elimination of Israel. Yeah. They've never worked for a two-state solution.
You can't work with a country that wants you gone. You can't.
Correct. They don't want you gone. They want you dead.
This guy's not thinking in reality whatsoever. He's like, you need the two-state Palestinian solution. You need to sign agreements and treaties with all of the bordering Arab nations for protection and aid. Aid. They did that with the Abraham Accords.
So let me say this, and this will be the kind of maybe the final thing I'll say on this.
Yeah,
is this: people have to recognize that not everyone thinks like you. So many of these people, they're using leftist arguments, are people who are trying to argue as if the people in the Middle East are Americans. It is a totally different culture.
Yeah.
And the things you value here in America, like individualism, they don't respect.
No.
They don't see that. Like, we don't value hospitality. That's a huge thing there. We look at things individually. We don't think of it as an area of shame and pride and honor. We don't value honor for generation after generation. They do. And so they have a long-term view, and they value strength. Why did they bow so quickly to Trump? Because he was the first one to come with strength, and that's what they value. And for those who know the name Nabil Quresh, people would watch him debate, and he would debate American Muslims very different than Middle Eastern Muslims. And he said, why? Because in the Middle East, if you don't show that you're passionate, if you don't show that your voice is raised and you seem angry, they believe you don't care. And so they think you don't really believe this. So he had to debate differently to the audience so that they would understand. And if you think that those in the Middle East have a Western mind of thinking, you're wrong. And that's why these arguments that they think are so strong, they don't work. I wish they would.
Yeah. Yes. And it's amazing just how, man, maybe we should have some geopolitics classes in public schools, or maybe just get rid of public schools. I don't know, but there, yeah, got you there. Yes, I just want to say, Andrew, thank you for being on the podcast. Thank you for your expertise in this area. You're actually an excellent person to have on a podcast regarding Israel, regarding geopolitics, regarding some of the things that are really hot button issues right now. And as Christians, how do we talk through these things? Well, we don't want to be like Ted Cruz and Tucker Carlson, where you just talk past each other. You really want to make conclusions based on what is actually true. What is the truth? What's the case? And I knew that I could have that sort of conversation with you in talking about Israel, dispensationalism, and the 12-day war. I'm glad that Israel won that war. I hope it stays a 12-day war, that it doesn't need to be picked up. And those of you Christians out there who maybe disagree with maybe some of our conclusions or some of the things we've got to say about this, here's the thing. You can disagree with us, but let's set aside all the talking points and let's address what is actually there, what is actually being said versus a caricature of what is being said. And let's have real, genuine conversation. One of the worst things that I hear from people is, oh, you've already bought into the propaganda. Well, okay, that's conspiratorial and that's not helpful. Let's have real Christian conversation when it comes to these cultural issues, these things that affect all of us and our society. And maybe we should quit teasing the dispensationalists so much. Maybe we could give them a break. Andrew, anything you'd like to say before I send this off to a close?
Well, I want to just thank you for having me on. It really is a privilege. Really appreciate it. And I hope to be on here again sometime. But, I think we covered a lot of topics, and I hope it is helpful. If people want to check out more of the stuff that I'm doing, just go to strivingforeternity.org. You can find the podcast, you can find my books, you can find our classes, all of it is there, strivingforeternity.org.
And before I close this thing out, I want to give just a real quick plug for the Christian podcast community, of which, again, I have referred to Andrew as kind of the godfather of the Christian podcast community, of which this podcast is also a part of. So if you can look into that, look into the Christian podcast community, there's a lot of other great podcasts on there, and you'll find something that you'll enjoy. I guarantee it. So with that said, thank you so much, Bold Apologia podcast listeners. Looking forward to the next conversation. Thank you for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this. If you have any more follow-up questions, let me know. We could probably get Andrew back on the podcast and have a follow-up conversation. With that said, thank you, everyone. Hope you all have a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful upcoming weekend as we go. And God bless. And
thank you for listening to the Bold Apologia podcast. To find out more about Adam Parker's projects, writings, or guest podcast episodes, visit his website at www.boldapologia.com. There you can get more information regarding Adam's works, contact him to be a guest on your show, or leave him a comment for Q&A. Until next time, thank you and God bless.